different countries. Next slide, please. Yeah, the report's central argument is that the global digital economy is increasingly split between two forces, integration and digital protectionism, and the choices governments make now will shape investment and competitiveness for years. It argues that resilience alone isn't the end goal. Countries need what the report calls trusted openness, which is openness to trade and data flows, but with safeguards that build confidence. And the most important framing for today's discussion is that trade, tax, and data are one system. So choices in one area create ripple effects across the others. The winners, in terms of attracting investment and scaling digital services, will pair interoperability and trust. They will adopt common rules, standards, and safeguards that reduce friction. Great. If I can just introduce the different panelists. So yeah, we have a highly experienced panel. Ahmad Bhinder is Director of Digital Policy and Intelligence at the DCO, and he's the lead architect of the Policy Watch series. He brings a couple decades of experience across digital, economic, and ICT policy in various regions. Then we have Nicole Isaac from Cisco. She's a Vice President of Global Public Policy for Government Affairs. She leads a global team working on policy conditions for ICT adoption and inclusive digital futures. She has had previous senior roles at Google, Meta, and LinkedIn, and was also working in the Obama White House. Lastly, we have Ed Aitken from DLocal. DLocal is a very exciting and fast-growing cross-border payments platform connecting global merchants to consumers in over 40 emerging markets. Ed leads engagement with governments and regulators on digital payments and the policy frameworks underpinning cross-border e-commerce. Okay, great. So a few housekeeping things. Before we start, this is roughly a 1-hour session. We'll run a moderated discussion first, and then we'll reserve the last 10 or so minutes for audience Q&A. We'll be collecting questions throughout the session, which our panelists will answer at the end. So please post your questions in the chat as we go. Questions could be general or for a specific speaker. And lastly, we'll also run 2 quick polls during the webinar to keep things interactive. You'll have about 5 minutes to kind of answer each poll. Okay, so yeah, now that we've set up the kind of report's core frame, trade, tax, and data as one system, I'd like to start with Ahmad at DCO, who works directly with member states on practical policy issues. Ahmad, Policy Watch 6 argues that digital resilience is not enough, that countries need to move towards trusted openness. In practical terms, what does that shift look like for a DCO member starting from a foundational or accelerating stage of development?
Thank you, Matthew. So let's start by framing the shift from resilience to integration, which is a topic, which was our resilience for our topic for the previous Policy Watch edition. Integration is our topic for the current Policy Watch edition. So digital resilience means, amongst other things, secure networks, stable digital markets, and robust institutions, especially focusing on the national geographical boundaries. These foundations for the member states matter a lot, but resilience on its own is a means, not a destination. So the destination is a meaningful participation in global digital economy through enhanced trade, AI-driven innovation, harmonized taxes, and trusted cross-border connectivity and data flows. Considering the diversity of DCO membership, the latest edition of DCO Policy Watch recognizes that not all the countries start from the same place. It therefore sets out a comprehensive stage-specific recommendations for the DCO member states across digital trade, taxation, and cross-border data flows based on their level of digital development. I'll mention just a few illustrative examples here. Please refer to the publication itself, which has a detailed table for the 3 stages of digital development and very concrete recommendations there. So let's divide our member states for the sake of simplicity into 3 stages: foundational, accelerating, and advanced. We have our digital economy navigator framework, which offers a more comprehensive and detailed staging, and it provides 5 stages of digital economy. But let's go back to the three stages, starting with the foundational stage. So at the foundational stage, the priority is building credible institutional core. For example, a modern digital data protection law supported by a functioning regulatory authority. It's not only about priority, it's not only about policy, but it is about signaling the regulatory trust. Saudi Arabia's personal data protection, for example, and its implementation regulations are good examples of how principles-based frameworks can provide certainty while remaining adaptable. Clear tax rules for digital services are, again, another foundational element to start with. When these rules are ambiguous for SMEs, the foreign suppliers, they face disproportionate compliance cost. EU's initiative on digitizing the VAT in the digital age, VIDA, reforms demonstrate how clarity can directly reduce friction on cross-border digital trade. When it comes to trade, full implementation of WTO trade facilitation agreement, particularly through digitized customs procedures, is recommended, which has measurable impact on e-commerce and low-value trade. Similarly, a national e-commerce strategy that aligns trade, tax, and logistics and digital infrastructure is a good practice. Malaysia's national e-commerce strategic roadmap 2.0 illustrate how whole of government planning can translate digital ambition into execution. So at this stage, the foundational stage, countries are resilient, but still largely inward-looking. The shift towards trusted openness begins at the accelerating stage. Here, the countries move from inward hardening to outward alignment. A key step to this stage is pursuing bilateral trade agreements with strong digital elements, covering e-commerce, cross-border data flows, electronic transactions, and platform governance. Agreements such as the UK-Singapore Digital Economy Agreement are examples of these. In parallel, countries increasingly participate in multilateral digital economy agreements as well, which allow them to align with emerging global norms while retaining flexibility. Some examples are Digital Economy Partnership Agreement, DIPA, which offers a modular and progressive approach to digital cooperation, and Africa's AFCFTA, its proposed digital trade protocol, which is creating continent-wide framework for trusted digital trade through phased implementation. So alongside these trade agreements, the use of standard data transfer tools, such as the SCCs and MCCs, model contractual clauses, become critical, particularly for SMEs that cannot navigate the bespoke legal arrangements in every market. Regulatory sandboxes also play a catalytic role in this stage. Bahrain's fintech sandbox demonstrates how controlled experimentation with data-driven services can attract investment, cloud infrastructure, and regional activity without weakening the regulatory oversight, of course. And finally, the advanced stage, where the trusted openness becomes a strategic rather than experimental. This is where countries actively reduce friction at stage. South Korea's example, for example, its pursuit of EU data adequacy followed an institutional strengthening of its data protection authority and resulting in a legal green lane for EU Korea data transfers, directly benefiting the exporters and digital service providers. Another powerful illustration is the concept of digital trade corridors, bilateral agreements with key partners that connect fully interoperable digital systems for customs, payments, and data flows. The UK's plan to pilot digital trade corridors reflect this approach by setting up end-to-end paperless trade routes, which with selected partners. The UK is testing how trusted data flows, digital customs, and interoperable payment systems can work together to dramatically reduce frictions for cross-border digital trade and goods. So together, in a sequence journey for the foundational, at the foundational stage, build resilience so system is safe and credible, move on to accelerating to connect to global systems through digital trade agreements and interoperability frameworks, and then moving on to advance to leverage trust to integrate deeply into regional and global digital value chains. Finally, DCO's tools that include Digital Economy Navigator that I have mentioned earlier, to the DCO interoperability mechanism for cross-border data flows, to the modern digital economy agreement, are designed to precisely help member states move along this path with confidence, coherence, and clarity. Thank you, Matthew.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that very kind of structured overview. And I think the examples you talked about were very useful as well. One follow-on question: what do you think are the most important building blocks of a trusted cross-border data flows for DCO members? And where do you see the DCO interoperability mechanism and also the model digital economy agreement adding the most value? And when I say adding value, I mean reducing fragmentation and compliance friction, while also, of course, protecting citizens.
Regarding the trusted cross-border data flows, let me start with a practical reality the governments face today. The challenge with cross-border data flows is no longer whether to allow them, but how to enable them in a trusted, lawful, and scalable way. In practice, trusted data flows rest on 4 core building blocks. When they work together, data becomes the engine for trade, services, and AI. When one is missing, trust quickly erodes. So the first one is a credible domestic foundation. Everything starts at home. As I mentioned earlier, a country needs to have a modern data protection framework backed by an empowered authority that businesses and foreign regulators can recognize as credible. This foundation signals that personal and sensitive data is governed by clear rules, enforceable rights, and accountable institutions. Without this, cross-border arrangements remain fragile. And once this is in place, trust becomes possible, even before any formal international agreements are concluded. Second one is the practical and lawful transfer mechanisms. So once domestic trust exists, businesses ask a very operational question. How do we actually move data across borders lawfully and predictably? For most companies, especially the SMEs, this relies on standardized contractual tools like model contractual clauses or SCCs, not the bespoke legal opinions. These tools are everyday workhorses for cross-border data flows. Fragmentation here is costly. Alignment here is transformative. Third one is the technical safeguards that reinforce trust. Legal tools alone are no longer sufficient. Governments increasingly rely on privacy-enhancing technologies, such as federated learning, secure computation, anonymization, and pseudo-anonymization, to reduce data exposure while preserving utility. These safeguards are especially important for AI, finance, and healthcare use cases where data sensitivity is high, but innovation potential is enormous. Fourth is the institutional cooperation. Trust must be maintained over time. That requires ongoing cooperation between regulators, shared interpretations of safeguards, and predictable escalation channels. And that is where entities like DCO really come into play to operationalize such cooperation. Without this institutional layer, even well-designed laws struggle in practice. Now coming to how does the second part of the question on how does the DCO interoperability mechanism help this in practice? So rather than imposing a single regulatory model and a mechanism the mechanism is designed to enable a trusted enablement framework that helps member states recognize and rely on each other's systems while preserving sovereignty. The mechanism works through 3 simple layers. First, the DCO privacy principles provide a shared trust anchor, common baseline expectations that allow different national systems to be understood and compared without replacing domestic laws. Second, DCO model contractual clauses translate the trust into practice, giving businesses, especially SMEs, interoperable legal tools to move data across the borders lawfully. And third is the accreditation. This is a country-level accreditation that operationalizes trust by allowing member states to demonstrate alignment with agreed standards, creating predictability for regulators and confidence for marketers. Together, these elements turn fragmented national rules into a network of trusted regimes, reducing frictions without having a need to harmonize the laws. Finally, the last element is the Model Digital Economy Agreement. DCO has proposed or is in the way of architecting a Model Digital Economy Agreement, as this is in line with the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement and the other ones. And this agreement is going to provide a trusted partnership between the DCO member states to operationalize cross-border data flows and trade facilitation on emerging technologies, AI capacity building, etc. So for the details, of course, please refer to the DCO Policy Watch, and we have included the details of all these mechanisms there.
Okay. Amazing. Yeah, thanks so much. And it's very exciting to hear about the great work that DCO is doing in creating these mechanisms and agreements to enable trusted data flows. Great. I think we can move to the next speaker. I would like to move from policy architecture to the kind of infrastructure and investment realities that kind of sit underneath it. Nicole joins us from Cisco, which is, of course, a global technology company that builds much of the internet's underlying networking and cybersecurity infrastructure. So I think Nicole's very well placed to explain what government policy choices mean for real-world deployment. Nicole, from Cisco's perspective, which policy conditions most directly affect investment in connectivity and digital infrastructure today?
Sure. Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Ahmad. Just to give you a sense, as Matt noted, Cisco is well positioned across the AI stack to support an AI-ready future through our hardware and software services. And our mission really is to power an inclusive future for all. And we do that each and every day through our networking, collaboration, observability, and security offerings. We are working to power the internet and to connect individuals across the globe and do this in a way that is secure. As Matt and Ahmad noted, the policy landscape is a critical one for really ensuring that we are doing this in an effective and efficient way. And one of the most significant challenges to investment that we're seeing is the presence of conflicting and complex regulatory processes. So when there is global fragmentation for regulations, in addition to challenges with respect to how we deploy high-speed broadband or the construction of advanced data centers, when there are not only regulatory challenges, but permitting challenges, this absolutely not only results in increased delays, but increases the cost of creating and developing innovative solutions and investing in critical digital infrastructure that AI really demands. We also know that, as outlined earlier, a predictable regulatory and tax environment is important for increasing private sector investment. And for both our customers and our partners, we need confidence that these capital outlays will not be undermined by policy shifts, whether it's unpredictable taxation or inconsistent enforcement. We need stability, and the stability that encourages substantial private capital that's required for large-scale investment in projects that are both AI-ready networks and AI-ready data centers. And so generally, not only are we seeing challenges with global fragmentation of regulations, but permitting and other siting issues, we know that to the extent that there is alignment and coordination, in addition to harmonization, this will facilitate an environment that absolutely drives innovation and increases trust globally. An additional example that I can share is just with respect to spectrum and the investment in spectrum, because we know that as there are increasing number of homes and devices that are online, where businesses are increasing their investment in agentic AI and will continue to invest, it's so very important that we have sufficient availability of unlicensed spectrum, and governments can continue to play a key role in fostering this type of policy environment and ensuring that we're investing in the digital infrastructure globally. Finally, I just want to underscore the importance of public-private partnerships, which work across the board to undergird these solutions and provide increased investments in ways that will continue to drive innovation and to harness an AI-ready future. So for us, we are absolutely committed to this each and every day, and we are excited about all of the potential that this will inspire and elicit as we move towards this globally.
Great. Thanks so much. Yeah, then just a kind of follow-on question related to the public-private collaboration. Based on your work with governments and international organizations, what are the forms of these public-private collaborations that you think actually help move countries from digital resilience to global integration? If there's any kind of practical models you can talk about here, what works in real life beyond MOUs?
Sure. I mean, I think Cisco has a number of them. We leverage public-private partnerships to really foster innovation and drive our work at scale, in addition to allowing for ways in which we can increase our expertise and our investments in both middle and last mile connectivity, building out data centers, and encouraging increased digital resilience. And so examples of this include our work with the ITU-T study groups, for instance, to develop collaboration and global standards with the ITU and other standard-setting bodies for purposes of adopting industry-led interoperable standards for AI, cybersecurity, and networking. And this is so very important for fostering trust, reducing fragmentation, and providing more integration globally for our digital economy. Other examples include our Cisco Networking Academy, where we work in conjunction with multilateral organizations, educational partners, and allies to really educate over 28 million individuals globally. And we've committed to educating and upskilling an additional 5 million, not only on the continent, but across the world for purposes of increasing access to AI skills, in addition to, of course, cybersecurity skills that are foundational. So, of course, our work with the ITU, with Cisco Networking Academy, in addition to our investments in the Cisco Responsible AI Framework, our alignment with the NIST AI RMF, our partnerships with the US government and governments globally to advance innovation and to ensure that we are investing in a secure, connected, AI-ready future. This is absolutely going to be transformational for the 2.7 billion individuals who are not currently connected. And for us, this is what we're doing each and every day, identifying the partnerships that we can invest in, expanding our work with governments, in addition to working closely with multilaterals to ensure that there's global harmonization and regulatory stability in a manner that invests and provides for increased innovation for all.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much, Nicole. That was great. If anyone in the audience has questions about asking for more information about those initiatives, feel free to drop them. Okay, then let's move to Ed. So finally, I think we could bring this to kind of the operational level, where global digital services actually kind of meet local consumers, and where I think friction shows up in practice. Ed is, of course, with dLocal, which helps global merchants accept local payment methods across emerging markets. So he can speak directly to kind of how rules on data tax and digital trade translate into real payment performance and risk controls and market access. Ed, on The first question, many governments increasingly see kind of payment systems as core economic infrastructure. How do you think how should countries think about designing payment architectures that respect local sovereignty while remaining interoperable with global digital trade?
Thanks, Matt, and thanks for that excellent question. Just to give a little bit more color to who DLocal is and what we do, we're effectively a gateway provider for global digital merchants, and we aggregate the local payment methods across all of these emerging markets. And we give our merchants a single API, which allows them to access over 900 payment methods across over 40 countries. And so that really sort of helps to unlock the power of these emerging markets and the potential, but it also ensures that the entire population in these regions, not just those who have an internationally recognized credit or debit card, are able to participate in the global digital economy. So, Matt, to answer your question, I like to sort of conceptualize payments more as almost as a sort of public interest infrastructure. It's not just a sort of commercial layer within the value chain, and payments really sit at the heart of economic visibility. They sit at the heart of the fight against AML and counter financing of terrorism, as well as sort of consumer protection and taxation. And so it's entirely reasonable that governments want to have sort of oversight of payments, and they want to understand where the value is created, and they want to have the ability to tax that value appropriately. At DLocal, we very much sort of believe in this world where a nation's payment rails are owned locally and are and they're transparent to local authorities rather than being sort of owned by foreign card schemes. And we call this sort of payment sovereignty, and it's really something that sits at the heart of what we're talking about here. Local ownership of payment rails does not equal isolation. Actually, payment sovereignty does not mean cutting off from global systems. Actually, quite to the contrary. If structured well, locally owned payment rails should plug into the global commerce and provide all the benefits of locally trusted payment methods to the end users. So there are limits of legacy global payment models, and much of the global payment stack was built in a sort of card-dominated, high-income economies where it was assumed that payers were banked. But of course, that model very much struggles in markets where mobile money dominates and instant bank transfers are a preferred payment method, and certainly where large parts of the population are underbanked or unbanked. So it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that if there is pushback against legacy payment rails, that when existing architectures limit sort of the visibility of data, the ability for local authorities to have visibility of a transaction, and therefore are limited in their ability to tax that transaction in an appropriate and fair way, and indeed the role of domestic institutions, if they are limited, whether that's in oversight or the ability to transact, these governments are naturally going to look for alternatives, and we're seeing that across the emerging markets. We're actually seeing sort of sovereign and state-backed sort of local payment methods, whether that's PIX in Brazil or UPI in India. These governments are really starting to realize that this is a matter of sovereignty, and that by having local payment rails, that doesn't, as I say, mean that they need to be isolated from the global digital economy. And so the solution is not about fragmentation, it's about interoperability, but that has to be put up front in the design process. And so local rails connected through trusted gateways with clear rules on sort of settlement and data and taxation is very much what we see, as the future.
Amazing. Maybe one related question then. Payment ecosystems, I think, look very different country to country. And how does that heterogeneity basically complicate one size fits all rules? And what does this imply for regulation and interoperability?
Yeah, good question. I think certainly, we always strive for a more homogeneous rule book across jurisdictions, but we have to play the field that we see in front of us. And indeed, dLocal was built exactly for this, to abstract away the complexity of doing business in multiple markets where payment rails, where the local payment rails reach the majority of the population, but where the rules on compliance and data and taxation, are different between each jurisdiction. Our philosophy is that local knowledge is always essential, and understanding how people want to pay is deeply shaped by a multitude of things, but ultimately trust is at the top of the the agenda. We often say that payment preferences is sort of generational. Our grandparents paid with checks. Our parents had credit cards, and the next generation are starting to pay with digital wallets. But our historical experiences and whether we have access to banking or not, all comes down to reliability and trust. Payments therefore are not just a technical choice; they are a behavioral choice. And at the heart of that behavior is trust. And if trust is the ongoing principle, then our merchants and their consumers, the consumers that our merchants are trying to reach, don't really understand, or dare I say it, care how it works. They just want to know that when they pay for something, that it feels safe, and nothing makes things feel safe more than allowing people to pay with their locally trusted payment methods. Whether that's a local bank card, a digital wallet, electronic money, and in many markets, these mobile monies and these domestic sort of instant payments are trusted more than the international cards, and they're certainly more prevalent. And so the global merchants who sort of want to be able to serve all of these customers in these high growth economies, they need to understand these local payment rails and payment methods. And once they do this, they can offer the same service at local price points through local payment methods. And without that understanding, they're going to miss often 80% of consumers in these markets. So bringing it back to regulation and your question of one size fits all regulation, we know that those sort of uniform rules often sort of favor this card-based system, and they disadvantage sort of these often dominant local payment methods, and ultimately that reduces payment acceptance. And when you reduce payment acceptance, it not only affects the merchant, but actually you sort of unintentionally shrink digital participation and inclusion in this sort of global digital economy. And speaking of digital participation, one of the wonderful insights that we see through the facilitation of the payments in emerging markets is things like the rise of alternative sort of credit models. Buy now, pay later is absolutely booming in these markets where most people don't have access to traditional forms of credit through a bank or a credit card. And these models actually depend heavily, these sort of local, these buy now, pay later models are real sort of microcosms of the importance of local data, local trust, and local sort of regulatory recognition that this is, you know, a safe and appropriate way for an economy to to grow, because access to credit is, you know, an essential part of of an economy's ability to grow. And so really the sort of regulatory implication is that government should regulate, you know, as we've heard from Nicole, as we've heard from Ahmad, on a sort of principle-based regulation method. You know, allow or ask these payment service providers to meet the outcome, not the rule book. Help us to understand the concerns that regulators have, whether that's about cross-border transactions, whether it's about expatriation of funds, whether it's about data localization. Because if we understand these concerns, we can find ways to satisfy those concerns, those legitimate concerns of regulators. But it'll allow us to do it in a way that doesn't, you know, require huge investment in time and resources, which ultimately slow down the growth and digital participation of of the population of these member states. So, you know, interoperability should always allow diversity, and it should not eliminate it.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, having had the pleasure of doing some work with DLocal, I know you're really big on having kind of on the ground presence and kind of really understanding these local markets and understanding people's digital payment methods. So yeah, I think it's a very useful service you're providing. If I think maybe we can look at the poll results, because they've come in. The first question was, and the panelists should feel free to comment on this. The first question was, what is the biggest barrier to growing cross-border digital business in your country or region right now? The answer that came out top was skills and organizational readiness, so relating to talent gaps, low adoption by firms and the public sector. The other issue that people focused on was rules that differ across countries. So these could relate to kind of data licensing, consumer protection, platform rules, etc. And these issues were rated much more important than, for example, connectivity and cloud constraints. If anyone wants to mention, if anyone wants to discuss any of those results, feel free to jump in.
I'll say something very quickly. I think this aligns very well with with our hypothesis, and it's really tested what we have discussed here: building resilience and then building interoperability. So a strong institutional framework, strong rules, regulations give clarity to the businesses, and that is the part of digital resilience. And then the second most important element is to build the interoperability and then having those rules to work together. It doesn't really mean always harmonization, but the ability for the rules for the data flows or trust or taxation to work together for businesses to allow them to operate across borders. So it's really good to hear the priorities and how do we set them in our narrative as well.
Good. And then the second poll, the question there was, if you could choose one priority for the next 12 to 18 months, what would make the biggest difference? The answer that came out top was faster, cheaper cross-border payments. So focused on interoperability, instant rails, better compliance processes. I think Ed would probably agree with that. And then the other answers here were simpler e-commerce rules for low-value trade, and also kind of a regional minilateral agreement to align rules related to shared standards, mutual recognition, etc. Any comments on that before we move to audience questions? Okay. Then we did receive a question from the audience, and any of the panelists should feel free to take it. It is many developing countries, particularly in South Asia and Africa, face rapidly changing economic and political conditions. In that context, how can governments build trusted cross-border data flows and attract sustained digital investment? And also, how does the DCO's work help structure these, help support these efforts in environments that may be less stable or predictable?
Well, so since it mentions DCO, if you allow me to start, and then of course Nicole and Ed could chip in. I think it's a very valid concern. So, and this was the finding of our foundational work when we were developing the DCO interoperability mechanism for cross-border data flows, which was huge diversity in the member states' approaches to regulation. And then the changes or possible changes that happen quite quickly to those approaches. And then the maturity levels vary quite significantly. So it is a very, very valid concern. And our approach is precisely designed for the environments where the capacity and stability varies. Trust does not require perfect conditions. You have to embed predictability into any system, and you have to institutionalize predictability into the systems that can then somehow withstand the economic and political changes. By anchoring national systems into shared principles, for example, the DCO privacy principles, and using the interoperable tools like the model contractual clauses, countries can continue to offer some sort of credibility, even the governments and their economic conditions change. So importantly, the DCO frameworks are modular and staggered. So it's not the countries based on the level of maturities, as I explained. They can start with an entry point of recognizing the principles, then start to operationalizing those principles into the legal conditions, and then at a much maturer level, they could accept or they could join the accreditation framework where adequacy and other mature regulatory regimes can come into play.
Amazing. We have a related question, and maybe Ed or Nicole could jump in. How can developing and emerging economies remain competitive and avoid being left behind in an interconnected digital economy where more advanced countries often set the pace on standards or investment and innovation? I think Ed, I know you're interested in this.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. It's a really good question, and I think from our perspective, or certainly if you look to the Policy Watch report, which talks about non-tariff barriers as a sort of first order policy problem, what do they mean by non-tariff barriers? They mean barriers to entry into a market that are not tariffs. So what does that mean? That's things like the requirement for data localization, for example. It's the requirement for organizations to simply understand and comply with local rules and regulations that are maybe unique to that jurisdiction, and by having to understand the unique regulatory environment, they are that creates a cost to companies. And so first of all, what I would say is there needs a recognition that we live in a globalized world. And yes, you are right that nations and indeed organizations in the global north are sort of setting the pace for innovation and investment, but emerging economies do not need to be left behind, and let me explain why. From our perspective, if there is an acknowledgement from the outset that a globalized economy will bring benefits to all, and an economy is created for connectivity. It is created for homogenized regulations. What that does is that whilst emerging economies have legitimate concerns about global merchants undercutting local merchants, or indeed a balance of payments, if there is a concern that by giving an entire population access to the global digital economy, there will be a greater outflow of funds than there will inflow of funds. What I would say is there is an increasing set of evidence that suggests that when you connect the entire economy to the global digital goods and services that are available, you create a multiplier effect within that economy that builds and creates a local innovation industry. And so aligning your and removing those non-tariff barriers that I spoke about at the beginning, and acknowledging that we are part of a global economy, whether we like it or not, and preventing sort of barriers from being presented, often with very legitimate reasons behind them, whether it's a concern over data sovereignty, whether it's a concern over balance of payments. But if regulators work with certainly whether it's organizations or wider policy think tanks, whether it's DCO or otherwise, to really sort of voice their concerns about why they are concerned about data sovereignty, why they are concerned about balance of payments, there is often a much better solution than putting these non-tariff barriers in place that actually prevent access to the global digital economy. And so by building in access to the global digital economy for your entire population from the beginning through the policies that you create, I very much believe that this leads to opportunity and innovation that allows emerging economies to really participate and accelerate their growth.
Amazing. Okay, then one more question from me. If each of you had to pick one policy priority for governments to move from resilience to trusted openness across trade, tax, and data, what would it be and why? And Nicole, I don't know if you have an answer there. So what is the top policy priority for governments as they want to move away from resilience to trusted openness? And it could relate to, I think, your answer before, of course.
Thanks, Matt. And just to underscore the earlier points about the importance of harmonization and investing in global networks, I do think if I had to pick one policy priority, connectivity is going to be foundational for all, and it needs to be secure connectivity as opposed to just access to the requisite markets and infrastructure. I also would recommend that governments consider really identifying what their strengths are, and so not trying to per se reinvent the wheel, or not trying to just chase what other governments may be doing, but really identifying their requisite strengths, investing in the important infrastructure, developing the right public-private partnerships to drive that forward, public-private partnerships that are secure and that can build on trusted technology, because I think that's going to be critical for really helping them advance in the AI era, making sure that these networks are trusted, secure, interoperable, and ways in which they can carry forward in an effective and efficient manner.
Amazing. Actually, we have one more question from the audience, and then maybe I'll come back to the other panelists. But a question for Ed. For newer founders and startups, cross-border logistics and customs procedures can feel like a major barrier to engaging in digital trade. And the question is, from your perspective, what are the most important steps to simplify cross-border logistics and customs processes, particularly in markets such as Pakistan?
Thanks, Matt, and thank you for the question. It's quite a specific one, and perhaps not one that I'm necessarily an expert in, given the fact that the majority of our merchants are digital, dealing in digital goods and services. But certainly, from a policy perspective, what's quite interesting recently is the perspective that dLocal has had on global trade in the wake of the American tariffs. And part of those tariffs, of course, were focused around low value goods entering the country and what sort of tax regime that they fell under. And we certainly saw, some of our clients do trade in physical goods. And we were seeing really interesting flows that had been flowing from, say, China to America, then flowing from China to emerging markets. And certainly what we saw was an uptick in the need for certainly taxation at the border to be really better sort of understood, and that all of a sudden became something that certainly the merchants had to understand deeply. So getting ahead of that game, you never know when the next tariff is around the corner that's going to change the direction of flow of goods and indeed services around the world. And it only, we were literally seeing cargo ships diverting course from their route from China to America, and then docking in, whether it was Pakistan or South Africa, and all of a sudden the tax regime changes, and we were seeing significant delays on the in logistics because of that. So I think that really the burden lies with the merchants and their acknowledgement that global trade routes are now less secure perhaps than they were before, and that they need to be agile in their understanding of the implications of wanting to change course very quickly. That might not quite answer your question, but I think it's the best you can do.
Great. I'm aware that we're like 3 minutes from closing time. I think to make sure we do finish on time, maybe I'll wrap things up. But I want to say, a huge thank you to all of our panelists. I thought that was a very interesting discussion. We got lots of different perspectives there. I think a key takeaway for me is that, of course, trade, tax, and data are kind of not separate policy files. They operate as this, single system, and rules on data transfers shape what cloud and AI services can be deployed. Rules on digital trade and market access shape whether firms can scale across borders. Everything is like very, very, very interlinked. And I think, when these pieces don't fit, the friction shows up, very quickly, first in infrastructure and in compliance decisions, and then in day-to-day realities like payments, acceptance, and service delivery. I also wanted to just mention that, I encourage people to go look at the Policy Watch report, which will go into like a lot of detail about these topics. But we also have another Policy Watch report coming out of DCO soon. So this one is focused, is called Money Rewired, and it basically shifts the lens to digital finance, including real-time payments, digital currencies, and open finance. And I think Ahmad will probably publish that in the next couple of weeks. Thank you so much to the audience for their questions. Thank you to our panelists, and I hope everyone has a nice day.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.